have the sensory system, and we have the motor system, somatic motor and autonomic motor. Are you familiar with the term efferent? Efferent means motor, afferent means sensory. Okay. So take a look at these pictures and tell me what you're seeing as far as some of the differences or similarities between these two pathways. Now this is just the motor portion. The sensory portion is just like, it doesn't matter if it's somatic or autonomic, you're going to have a receptor and you're going to have a sensory neuron and you're going to have a place where those signals meet and are processed. We're looking at just the motor portion now. Everything's been processed and now the signal's being sent. So what do you see here? Does anything stand out as different or uniquely similar between the somatic and autonomic pathways here? Okay. The autonomic pathway has to go through a ganglion. And remember what a ganglion is. It's a collection of cell bodies in the peripheral nervous system. What do we call a collection of cell bodies in the central nervous system? Anybody remember that? It's called a nucleus or nuclei. Don't confuse it with the nucleus of a cell. Why they called it that, I don't know. Some of these terms have been around for years. But when we talk about a nucleus of the nervous system, we're talking about a collection of cell bodies in the central nervous system. And there's nuclei all over the place in the brainstem. These are a collection of cell bodies that are responding to sensory signals from various places and then sending out motor responses. It's what gives the brain and the spinal cord the integrative capacity, the capacity to make decisions. Right, so we have a ganglion here that's involved in the autonomic, but no ganglion in the somatic, all right? What else? In the somatic pathway, we have acetylcholine being released by that motor neuron, but down over here, we have either acetylcholine or norepinephrine being released in the autonomic pathway. So the neurotransmitters can differ. Well, it's one of the things that is glaringly obvious. In fact, I mentioned it going over that blood pressure class. Two neurons in the autonomic motor pathway. And it's at that ganglion where those two neurons meet. So that ganglion in the autonomic pathway contains the cell bodies of the second neuron in these pathways. The effectors, somatic or skeletal muscles, effectors for visceral or autonomic or cardiac muscle, smooth muscle, and glands. The other thing that maybe isn't so obvious is the location of the cell body of the first neuron. In the somatic pathway, that cell body is going to be found in the anterior horn of the gray matter, always. Somatic motor neuron is always going to be found, the cell body of a somatic motor neuron is always going to be found in the anterior horn of the gray matter. Whereas the cell body of that first neuron, which by the way is called the preganglionic fiber or preganglionic neuron, that cell body is going to be found either in the brainstem, and it can make its way all the way from the brainstem all the way to a ganglion in another part of the body, so it can be a pretty long fiber. Or it's going to be in the lateral horn of the spinal cord. Or the lateral horn of the gray matter of the spinal cord. So those are the major differences between this somatic motor pathway and autonomic motor pathway. The number of neurons, the neurotransmitters secreted, the fact that there's a ganglion, and the effectors, and the location of the motor cell body. Now, you don't have to do this, but you can. You may want to make up your own little matrix that compares these two, somatic with autonomic. You can tell I really like these matrices, don't you? So you can compare number of nerve fibers, the neurotransmitters. Is there a ganglion present or not? What are the effectors? Location of cell body. You can compare that as well. You don't have to do that, but you can. One of the things, if you don't want to do a matrix, is maybe you can write a written description, a picture with words that describes these pathways. So the autonomic motor pathway, the preganglionic fiber cell body can begin in the brainstem, or it can begin in the lateral horn of the spinal cord. It then synapses with the postganglionic fiber at an autonomic ganglion. The neurotransmitter released by the preganglionic fiber is acetylcholine, which then stimulates a nerve signal in the postganglionic fiber, where then that is then either going to release acetylcholine or norepinephrine on the effector. You can do it that way, or you can do a table. However, I don't care how you want to do it, but that's what I want you to know. Okay. Practice writing. Let's say I'm going to just assume I'm going to put an essay question on the exam, or a short answer question to ask you to compare and contrast the motor pathways of the somatic and autonomic motor system. Okay? And draw a picture. So do that. Even if I don't ask you as an essay question, there's going to be multiple choice questions related to these. And if you can write an essay question about that correctly, then you should be able to answer the multiple choice question correctly too. Okay? So why don't you take 5 minutes and go ahead and either make your own matrix or start writing a sentence that describes what you're seeing in pictures, and then draw a picture yourself. You don't have to be an artist to draw pictures, as long as you know what they mean. Oh, sorry. Matt. Josh. It's Charlie's fault. He wasn't wearing a hat. He just totally threw me off for the day. You weren't here, were you?
Thank you.
That's why I'm doing the blackboard. Consider to put on blackboard?
No, I just wondered. That's a lot of stuff.
No. I'm going to try and avoid that.
You gonna try to avoid that, or
I'm going to avoid it, yes.
So these are two different pathways within the body. It's not like that somatic runs in the same line as the autonomic.
Yeah,
Just
oh,
bypasses the
Okay, good question was asked. These are different pathways, but you can, in a spinal nerve, have both somatic and autonomic fibers. And you do.
So that somatic could run through that kind? Or, you know what I mean?
Not necessarily. I'll show you a picture of that in a few minutes. Yeah. So when we look at those spinal nerves, there are some spinal nerves that are really specifically just somatic. But most spinal nerves are actually a combination of somatic and autonomic motor pathways. Any questions about these motor pathways here, somatic versus autonomic?
So the somatic motor neuron cell body is found in the anterior corner.
Correct. Whereas the preganglionic cell body, now when I say preganglionic fiber, you should automatically think autonomic, because there is no ganglion in the somatic pathway. So the preganglionic cell body is either begins in the brainstem or in the lateral horn. In some cases, because the lateral horn doesn't exist, the farther down you go in the spinal cord, like in the sacral regions, then actually it would be anterior horn. But I didn't want to get to that right then, but yes. Any other questions about these motor pathways in general? We are going to look specifically at the sympathetic and parasympathetic pathways. And there are some differences there as well. So you can create an additional matrix comparing certain characteristics in the sympathetic and parasympathetic pathways. And really, I'm trying to filter this down because some of this stuff we go into more detail next semester, and I want you to have a basic foundation that we can build on. All right? Okay, sympathetic